Alright, let's go ahead and continue our operations with signed numbers. The next operation that we're going to look at is subtracting signed numbers. This also comes from section 9.2 of your textbook. So let's start off with some vocabulary. When we talk about signed numbers, we have a new term called the additive inverse. A number and its additive inverse add to 0. So the additive inverse of a number is its opposite. So let's make sure we understand what we mean by opposite. So for the examples below, let's go ahead and list the additive inverse. So for 5, what is the opposite of 5? It is negative 5. 5 and negative 5, when you combine them, they combine to 0. Similarly for 48, the opposite of positive 48 is negative 48. 48 and negative 48 combine to 0. Now what about 0? Does 0 have an opposite? Technically, the opposite of 0 is just 0. 0 has no sign, so what do you need to add to 0 to get 0? It's just 0. For example D, what is the opposite of negative 1? Well, the opposite of a negative is a positive, so the additive inverse of negative 1 is just 1. And same thing for negative 24. The opposite of negative 24 is positive 24. Negative 24 and positive 24 combine to 0, so they are additive inverses. Okay, so let's talk about our definition of subtraction. Subtraction is the same as adding the opposite. For instance, 10 minus 5. This is the same thing as 10 plus, what's the opposite of 5? It is negative 5. And if you remember from our previous discussion, 10 minus 5 is just 5. What about 10 plus negative 5? What do we do there? We do have different signs. We subtract and keep the sign of the larger number, so we would also get positive 5 in this case. So these two statements are equivalent. So what is our procedure in order to subtract? The first thing we want to do is we want to change the subtraction sign to addition and change the second number to its opposite. From there, we're going to use the rules that were presented in the last section based on whether the signs are the same or different. Now, one of the things to note, whether you choose to actually change it to an addition problem or not is up to you. The main thing to keep in mind is the only one that we have to change is whenever you see minus a negative, you have to change this to plus a positive. Double negatives, English majors hate double negatives. If you use a double negative in an English paper, your English teacher is probably going to mark it up completely. So for instance, if I say, I did not misunderstand you. This is an example of a double negative. So where are negatives? Not. Misunderstand means I did not understand you. So if I did not understand you, this is the same thing as saying I did. Understand you. Okay, so now when looking at subtraction problems, We want to never think of the minus sign as an operation. If you see a minus sign, that does not necessarily mean subtract. What we want to do is we want to consider it as the sign of the number following it. So let's go ahead and look at some examples just to get some practice of this. Okay, so we've got lots of examples, so hopefully by the end of this you'll get the idea. If we look at example A, I'm going to convert some of these to addition, and then after that, if it's easier for you, then continue with it. If we look at -7 minus -5, I want to change this into a addition problem, so I'm going to change this into add the opposite of 5, which is -5. From here we want to add using our rules of adding sign numbers. So do we have same signs or different signs? We do have same signs, and so we are going to actually add these numbers and keep the sign. We should get -11. Now whether you choose to write this as an addition problem or not is up to you. But when I look at this problem, I see combine -6 and -5. We have same signs, we add and keep the sign. All right, let's look at B. If we change this into an addition, we get 0 plus -10. And if you remember from our previous module, remember that anything plus 0 is itself. So we get -10. Example C, 4 minus 10. We get 4. If I change this into an addition problem, we get plus -10. Do we have same signs or different signs? This one we have different signs, so we are going to subtract, keep the sign of the larger number. We get -6. Again, if you choose to not write this as an addition problem, what do we have here? We have a +4 and a -10. We have different signs. All right, for example D, 8 minus 5. This one you could probably do without thinking in terms of sign numbers, but let's go ahead and think of it in terms of sign numbers. We have 8. I'm going to change this to plus a -5. Different signs, so we are going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number, so it's going to stay positive. Okay, so for the next two, I'm not going to write it as an addition. I'm just going to go ahead and talk through it. What do we have here? We have a +2 and a -17. That is different signs. So I want to subtract, keep the sign of the larger number. We get -15. And example F, -10 minus 4. Same thing. Do we have same signs or different signs? Well, this is a -10 and a -4. This is same signs, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. We get -14. So as you see here, again, with sign numbers, if it's a plus, it does not necessarily mean add. Similarly with minus, if it's a minus, it does not necessarily mean subtract. It all depends on whether you have same signs or different signs. Okay, so now let's look at some other examples. Now for this next set, we want to go ahead and remember our rule for minus and negative. These are ones that we do have to convert into addition. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this as 3 plus, what's the opposite of negative 10? It is positive 10. So these two negatives become a plus. From here, we're going to use our rules of addition. 3 plus 10, do we have same signs or different signs? We have same signs, so we are going to add and keep the sign. Example H. Again, I want to change minus a negative 2 into plus a positive 2. Negative 8 and positive 2, do we have same signs or different signs? We have different signs, so we are going to subtract. We get 6. Keep the sign of the larger number, which is negative 8. So our final answer is negative 6. Example I. Same thing. I'm going to take my minus negative 12, and I'm going to rewrite it as plus positive 12. Do we have same signs or different signs? This is negative 4 and positive 12, so we have different signs. If they have different signs, remember we subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. Since 12 is larger and it's positive, our answer will be positive. All right, example J. Again, we're going to take our minus and negative. We're going to rewrite it as plus a positive. We have negative 9 plus 6. Same signs or different signs? Since these are different signs, we're going to subtract. Keep the sign of the larger number, so we get negative 3. Example K. We're going to change our minus and negative to a plus, a positive, and 3 plus 5. We have same signs. We add and keep the sign. Example L. Negative 12 minus negative 15. We're going to change our minus and negative into plus a positive, so we get negative 12 plus 15. We have different signs, so we are going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. We get positive 3. Okay, so now let's go ahead and kind of mix these up. Example M, we have 4 minus negative 11. We're going to rewrite our minus negative 11 as plus a positive 11. And 4 plus 11 is 15. Example N. We take our minus and negative 4. We get negative 1 plus positive 4. We get different signs, so we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. We get 3. Okay, negative 2 minus 9. We don't have a minus and negative here, so we want to remember that these are same signs. Negative 2 and negative 9 combine to negative 11. We're going to add and keep the sign. Example P. We have negative 6 minus 6. Now before you go and say it's 0, 6 minus 6 is 0. But negative 6 minus 6 is not the same thing. So on this one, remember that we have same signs. We want to combine and keep the negative. So we get negative 12. Now what about Q? Negative 5 minus negative 5. Remember, we have minus and negative, so the first thing I want to do is change that to a positive. And now negative 5 plus 5, these do have different signs, so now we can subtract. They are opposites. They do combine to 0. Okay, so that takes care of subtracting two numbers. So let's go ahead and extend the concept. When there are more than two terms being added or subtracted, always perform the operations from left to right. Now, we can use the commutative and associative rules only if we treat all subtractions as adding a negative. If you remember that subtractions are always adding a negative, then basically everything here is being added together. And addition is commutative and associative. So let's go ahead and work through some of these examples. We're going to talk about different ways that we can combine them in order to get our answers. All right, so if we look at example A, first way I'm going to do this is from left to right. So if we go from left to right, we have 6 and negative 7. These have different signs, so I'm going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. We get negative 1 plus negative 3. Now we can go ahead and combine negative 1 and negative 3. They have same signs. So we can go ahead and combine them into negative 4. Remember, same signs, add and keep the sign. Okay, so let's look at this problem again and just look at some other ways that we can do this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say what you are not allowed to do first. You are not allowed to do 7 plus negative 3. This is not a 7, this is a negative 7. So when you combine this, if you want to combine your negatives first, just remember that 7 is not a 7, it is a negative 7. Negative 7 and negative 3 combine to negative 10. 6 and negative 10, we now have different signs, so we can subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. Okay, so just remember those minus signs. We want to think of them as being the sign of the number following it. All right, let's look at example B. First thing I want to do in order to complete this problem, I'm going to take any of my minus and negatives and turn them into plus a positive. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 2 plus negative 3 plus positive 5. If we go ahead and go from left to right, that's a bit easier. I can combine negative 2 and negative 3. We have same signs, so we're going to add and keep the sign. I'm going to bring down my plus 5, and now negative 5 plus 5 is 0. To me, that's the easiest way to do this problem, so I'm not going to do it another way. But just remember, you can combine these however you want, as long as you remember the sign goes with its number. Okay, so let's look at example C. If we go from left to right, we get 7 minus 7 is 0. 0 minus 7 is negative 7. Another way that you can do this problem is, again, if you want to combine your positives together and then your negatives together, we can do negative 7 and negative 7 combined to negative 14. 7 and negative 14, we have different signs, so we can subtract. Keep the sign of the larger number, we get negative 7. So either way, we will get the same thing. The only thing that you cannot do, again, on this problem is you cannot treat this as minus 7 minus 7. Do not do 7 minus 7 and get 0, and then do 7 minus 0. That would be an invalid way to do the problem. All right, a couple more. Let's look at example D. Again, for me, I always like combining my negatives together and my positives together. So if we were to combine this, we get negative 3 and negative 9 combined to give me negative 12. Bring down our plus 4. And negative 12 plus 4, we have different signs, so we are going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. All right, let's look at example E. So let's see here. There are lots of ways you can do this problem, but let's go ahead and do this. Let's do negative 5 and negative 10. These have same signs, so we are going to add and keep the sign. I'm also going to combine negative 12 and positive 1. These numbers have different signs. Remember, that's a negative 12. And if we combine those, we're going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. Now if we go ahead and combine negative 15 and negative 11, these have same signs. So we are going to add and keep the sign. We get negative 26. All right, the last thing that we want to look at is an application problem. So we have Pao Zhang is a bookkeeper for a small business. The company checking account is overdrawn by $3,881. He deposits a check for $2,090, and I want to know what is the balance in the account. So the first thing that we have is we have negative $3,881. We are going to deposit $2,090. Now, when I do this problem, I don't like lining it up vertically like this. Me personally, when I look at this and I see that plus sign, my mind automatically goes to addition. But is this an addition problem? The answer is no. We have different signs. So I want to subtract. So let's go back to what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to subtract disregarding signs. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to subtract disregarding my signs. And I'm going to do my computations off on the side and then go back and determine the sign of my answer. So if we go ahead and subtract this, we get 1 minus 0 is 1. I cannot do 8 minus 9. I have to borrow. So I'm going to make the 8 a 7. And I'm going to make the second 8 an 18. 18 minus 9 is 9. 7 minus 0 is 7. And 3 minus 2 is 1. This is my scratch work. Now I want to take it back over to my problem. We subtracted, disregarding signs. And now, what is the larger number? The larger number is 3,881. It is negative, so my answer will be negative. I'm also going to include my units, and so we should have negative $1,791. Okay, so I'm going to say when working on addition and subtraction, just be very careful. Make sure that you are continuing to chant the mantra, same signs, different signs, add, subtract, etc., etc. Be very careful on these problems. A minus sign does not necessarily mean subtract. This, I think, is one of the hardest operations for students to grasp, and so I'm just going to encourage you to take your time and make sure that you are remembering your rules for same signs versus different signs. All right, that takes care of addition and subtraction. The next section we're going to look at is multiplication. And I will tell you that in the grand scheme of things, multiplication and its other operation, division, are much easier in terms of working with sign numbers. So go ahead and take a break, and I'll see you shortly.